All right, we are live. Today, we are diving into something that I believe is not optional if someone truly wants to heal. We talk a lot about minerals, mitochondria, lymphatic flow, brainwave states, and cellular voltage in the George method. We talk about trauma stored in tissue, nervous system dysregulation, but underneath all of that is something even more powerful: programming. Most people are trying to heal with a conscious mind that represents maybe 5% of their behavior, while the other 95% is running on scripts installed before they had language, before they had agency or choice. And the scripts don't just shape personality. If the subconscious believes it's unsafe to thrive, the body will not fully heal. If the subconscious believes suffering equals love, the nervous system will recreate chaos. So today, I'm speaking with Glenn Harold, a pioneer in the hypnosis space and founder of the Ultimate Hypnosis app, among other apps, to explore something deeper than relaxation or stress reduction. Glenn Harold is one of the world's most successful hypnotherapists and self-help authors. Over a 28-year career, he's helped transform the lives of thousands of clients. So, Glenn, I'd love to get your take on the subconscious as the operating system of the body and explaining basically how human behavior is shaped by our day-to-day programming.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So I've been a hypnotherapist for since the 90s, so 28 years, as you said, and seen a lot of clients one-to-one over that time. I don't see so many clients one-to-one nowadays because my meditation apps and books are my main focus these days. It's a fascinating subject. The unconscious mind, it's where we store all of our memories, all of our childhood experiences, everything that's ever happened to us is locked away in our unconscious mind. And sometimes we can be triggered by certain things in our life that are, being exacerbated by programs that are running in our unconscious mind. So you can have these triggers, and if you're not self-aware, if you haven't done a lot of inner work, you may not realize that you're running on these old programs, these old conditioned patterns. And it was something, when I became a hypnotherapist, I really did a lot of work on that because I had a very, very dysfunctional childhood in that I grew up in a very violent, dysfunctional home. I'd run away from home when I was 12, slept on the streets, ran with a bad crowd, because I didn't have a stable family life. I found my family became a gang on the streets, and we got up to all kinds of trouble. And, I say in my book, I was on first name terms with the local magistrate, and it was a real wild youth. But the one thing it gave me a real strong sense of independence because I couldn't rely on my family. There were no authority figures I trusted. So I just had to rely on myself. And that's kind of been a positive that came from my childhood because I've always carried that all the way through, and I'm very, very independent. At one point I did have to learn to open my heart up again because I'd shut down like a lot of people do when they go through traumas. They shut down. And it was through getting interested in hypnotherapy, becoming a therapist, that I enabled to open that part of me up and then bring some balance into my life. And I did a lot of clearing work on these failure programs and sabotage patterns because I really, I grew up being told I was stupid. I was kicked out of school when I was 15. I was called prospects by the other kids because it was considered I had none. So it wasn't a blinding start. And I really worked on clearing a lot of that conditioning that I grew up with. And it's been a huge part of my work, and it's something I love helping other people with. It's something I infuse my meditation and hypnotherapy recordings with, that opportunity to, look deep inside and to really heal on a deep level and clear failure programming and sabotage patterns.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because I also had a similar background in that I ended up not trusting.
We have got similar backgrounds,
Yeah.
literally.
Backgrounds like
You
the
took that picture in California, I took this one in Lagos in Portugal,
right.
and we have figuratively and literally, we've got the same background.
Right, and it's funny, we end up helping people,
Yeah,
and so,
yeah,
maybe our childhood difficulties ended up putting us front and center to where we can actually make a difference in the lives of others because we
yeah,
suffered, struggled in childhood as well.
yeah. Well, I think that's it. Once you go on that journey, for me, my solace when in my younger life was booze and drugs. It's a typical story. I drank myself into oblivion, and one day I woke up, my skin had turned yellow, and I was at death's door, and I knew I had to change. I had to get out of that, and I did. It was a real big wake up call. And so I joined a band at that time. I was 17 when that happened. I joined a band, took me off in a more positive direction, and it kind of changed the course of my life. Because years later, I was playing on the cabaret circuit in London, and we shared the bill with a stage hypnotist. And I watched him manipulating the audience and getting them to dance around like chickens and do outrageous things. And it just captivated me. And I thought, I saw the power in hypnosis, and I thought, I want to learn everything I can about it. But I didn't want to do the stage thing. I knew that. So I did a 2-year diploma with the British School of Clinical Hypnosis, and I loved it. But even sitting in a classroom again, that was my late 20s, it really freaks me out because my only experience of being in a classroom was at school. And it was a very, very negative experience to the point I'd been expelled from school. So I used to feel panicky sitting in a classroom at 28, even though I voluntarily went there and I wanted to learn. I was running on this old program that was telling me, no, you're not good enough for this. You know, it's not going to work out. But I recognized it. At this point, I was old enough to understand what was going on. And also, one of the first things they taught us was self-hypnosis. So I used self-hypnosis, put myself into a relaxed state, switched off my monkey mind, went down into that calm, relaxed state. And then I started visualizing my past sitting in a classroom and clearing all the negative feelings and memories and images that I had. So they'd come up, these memories, and I'd work through them. And I'd literally change the way I felt about them, revisit them from, my new perspective, and process each one of them as they came up. And then sure enough, I went back to the classroom and I felt good. I was ready to learn. I was up for it. And that old program wasn't then pulling me back. And that's kind of a really good metaphor for what you said earlier, where, we do have all of these programs running. Unless you went through a childhood where you had two enlightened, conscious parents who nurtured you through every stage of your development and were present for you all the way through, unless you had that, you've got these conditioned patterns of behavior that are potentially holding you back. So yeah, that was a big skill thing for me because I'd learnt this new skill and suddenly I could change that failure programming and these sabotage patterns that had been holding me back up to that point. And I was so hungry for change at that time because I'd always been broke up to that point. Relationships had been fleeting. I could never hold down a proper job. I was mini cabbing at night, playing my guitar in bars at the weekend. And I was hustling my way through life. And, thank God I found hypnosis. I applied myself. I started to, heal a lot of my trauma and the failure programming. And then probably similar journey to you, once you've done enough of that and you understand the process really well, you want to help others do the same. You have this passion because you've been there, you've experienced the real world, experience of what it's like to be stuck, and you come out of it and then you want to help others, and you're good at it because you've been through that. Yeah, no textbook can teach you that. If you've had the real world experience, that's the key ingredient.
That is true. I love that. And there's so many things that hypnosis can help. And like you said, you used to be an alcoholic. I've heard
Mm,
so many great things about people being able to use self-hypnosis to stop their alcoholic addiction, their
mm,
addiction to drugs, their addiction to anything,
Mm.
really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very powerful tool because what it enables you to do is to go behind the addictions. You know, if you think about it, I drank, myself into oblivion because it was numbing the pain of my childhood. But at the time, I didn't realize that. I just loved being out with the boys and getting blind drunk and doing outrageous things and getting into trouble. I didn't realize what was behind it at that time. But once I started to understand the, relationship between the conscious and the unconscious, I would then navigate and start to look much deeper and try to understand why I had these destructive patterns and what was at the heart of it. And I did a huge amount of work on that with hypnotherapy, but also other therapies, because once I became a hypnotherapist, I had a skill for the first time in my life. And so I'd swap sessions with other therapists like kinesiologists and psychologists and counselors because I was really on a mission. I had a lot to heal. And I still, I think we're all a work in progress. You never get to that end point. We're
Right.
just all on this journey and it's kind of never ending. There's always new things to face and new challenges that come along. But you get to a point, I'm at a point now where I've done a lot of work and I'm so different to that younger version of me. And I feel so grateful that I've been able to create success in my life. I've got a lovely family. I live out here in Portugal and my oldest boy's a hypnotherapist.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
yeah, it's beautiful. He's 38 now and he's great. It's kind of good because I've kind of finished seeing clients and anyone that wants to see me, I pass them on to Lee. And he's kind of like a younger, better version of me, if you like, because he's really at the top of his game with hypnotherapy. He's doing brilliant work. If anyone wants to find him, it's leeharold.com. He's got his website, Lee Harold.
Man, how great
And
is that? Passing
sorry?
that gift along to your son.
Yeah, yeah. It's been great. And he's very conscious as well. We talked about that before we came on. We're on the same path. We're on the same trajectory. I taught him a lot when he was younger because one thing I wanted to do, I wanted to break the cycle in my family.
Mm.
If you come from a very challenging family, unconscious family, and, it causes you all lots of problems. One of the things I wanted to do when I became a father was to break that cycle and be there for my son when he needed me. And I've always done that, with the older one. I do it with my younger ones. I've got a 9 and 11-year-old now. And, parenthood's a challenging journey, but, through thick and thin, I'm always there for them. And I love it. It's the most rewarding thing. And I love that I've broken that cycle. My granddad was a bare knuckle boxer. He used to fight on the streets of London for money and he was a bookmaker. And, when I think like 2, 3 generations on, we're healers. It's
Right.
a world apart from where he was. And so, yeah, it's a real blessing to awaken and to have that opportunity to really nurture your children and not load them up with the same crap that we got loaded up with,
Right.
and liberate them and empower them as well. And because I'd learned hypnotherapy when Lee was like 6, he was really young, and anytime he had an exam at school or he was struggling, I'd use hypnosis, self-hypnosis, and I'd teach him it and I'd work with him. And, lo and behold, he's a hypnotherapist now. So it's amazing. It's amazing how you can empower them.
That definitely speaks to the benefits. And I remember the first time I ever experienced hypnotherapy. Um, I grew up in a very chaotic family and I was in fight or flight my entire life. Go, go, go.
Mm,
And I couldn't relax. I couldn't sit down. I had to be always doing something.
mm.
And when I first experienced hypnotherapy, the drop into parasympathetic was night and day. And I was like, wow, this is so amazing.
You found
And
peace.
yeah, it's been ever since. It's just been getting back to that and rewiring my neurology to stay there, stay
Yeah.
in a calming space where you're not reactive.
Yeah.
And, um, you know, traditional therapy just it doesn't come close to self-hypnosis or hypnotherapy.
Mhm.
Um, and let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting you say that you spent your life in fight or flight, and then suddenly you found hypnosis and you went down into that state and you experienced peace,
Yeah.
and you realize you don't have to stay in that all the time. You can break out of it. And that's like kind of a good metaphor for what happens when you go into that state, because you quieten the mind down, you slow your brain waves down, your whole physiology relaxes, and you drop down into this state where you're out of the monkey mind. You're not thinking of anything. Your left brain quietens down, your right brain opens up, your creativity, starts up. And it's such an empowering place to be. And, just today, well, I've had a really busy day today. I had a few workmen round. It's just been a busy day in the house, lots going on, and a few business issues that came out of the blue. And I was feeling a little bit stressed earlier. So I mentioned to you before, I'd finished a recording, and a brand new recording called Mental Health Meditation. And I spent about 2 weeks scripting it, recording it, and then mastering it. And, because every recording I make now, I really put my heart and soul into it, because I know that, millions of people end up listening to them. So I really go over every line and work on it. And so I'd done that for the last couple of weeks, and I thought, I'm going to listen to that and I'll shut down, I'll switch off, but I'll proof it as well. It was kind of two jobs in one. So I laid down about an hour ago, put the headphones on, listened to it, and it was sounding good. It was sounding nice and warm. And I thought, yeah, this is going to help people. It's going to connect with people. But then I went so deep that I eventually fell asleep, and I only heard half of it.
Yeah, that often happens to me, and it's so great because
Yeah.
people who struggle with sleep or to shut their mind off, half the
Mm.
time I would fall asleep when the recording started.
Yeah.
Shortly into the recording, I'd fall asleep and I'd be like, "Okay, now I have to re-listen to it all over again." But you
Yeah.
don't have to. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to know what it's saying.
Well, no, up to a point. So when you listen to a recording, because a lot of people ask us that, if I fall asleep, do I still take on board the suggestions? And you do, up to a certain point. So if you think your brainwaves slow down from 14 cycles per second plus, they come down through the beta, alpha, theta, and then down to the delta state, which is the deepest sleep state. So if you're listening to the recordings and you drop down to the alpha state, even the theta state, you're still taking on board the suggestions and the affirmations. But if you go down into the delta state, you're in a deep sleep state and you're not taking on board the suggestions because you're in a very deep sleep. So yeah, that's it. And most people get through the recordings, they fall asleep, but they don't necessarily go into that deepest sleep state. And yeah, so the more often than not, even though you're asleep, you'll be taking on the suggestions to a point.
Now, how does that work? The difference between getting regular therapy and getting unconscious programming.
I think there's different tools for different issues. So depending on what you're struggling with, it's kind of, it may be hypnotherapy that helps you. It may be there may be a childhood trauma that you need resolving. There may be some seeding event that, only hypnotherapy will get to. And sometimes the recordings can only go so deep. If you've got a specific issue that's, anchored in your childhood, the recording may not touch that. It may just touch more of a surface level. I mean, I've made recordings like Heal the Mother Wound, Heal the Father Wound that do go really deep into the,
Very
sort
helpful.
of, yeah, deep therapy, really deep therapy. And what's the other one? The Healing Your Inner Child. That's another one. They're kind of recordings that do go, back into your childhood in a very safe way and allow you to explore, various traumas that might be holding you back. But I've kind of had a, multi-pronged um, way of dealing with all the issues that I faced, needed to overcome. And hypnotherapy has been the vast majority of that. But a number of years ago, I read about ayahuasca in Sting's biography. I was reading Sting's biography, and suddenly I read about this plant medicine from South America. This was probably about 20 years ago. And I read about it and it really resonated with me. I thought you can go on this powerful shamanic journey with this medicine that will heal your luminous energy, blocks in your luminous energy field. It will heal past lives, karmic patterns. And it was kind of it felt to me like the next step on. And so I put it out there. I thought I'm going to meditate on finding the right way to connect, do a ceremony somewhere. And I was set on going to Peru at the time. And just by chance, we'd gone to a little vegan cafe in Brighton in England. And there was a guy playing there and he was making this incredible trippy music, really unusual spiritual music. And it really pulled me in. I thought, wow, this is incredible. It was only a small little cafe. And in between songs, he mentioned that he was running a ceremony that Saturday, that next weekend. And I couldn't believe it. I was suddenly here thinking, wow, that's exactly where I want to be. And so I spoke to him afterwards and he said, yeah, we've got a spare place if you want to come along. He spent 2 years in Peru with a shamanic tribe, and the medicine that he got over from Peru was, from a really pure lineage, and he had that strong connection to them. And so I went to his place in the middle of the Kent countryside for the first time, and journeyed in this little room with these big speakers. He had massive speakers. And because he'd been a musician, he was playing music for the ceremony. And he knew how, he was like a DJ. He'd been a DJ before, like in sort of his normal life. And he was DJing throughout the night. And it was still to this day, I've experienced ayahuasca many times since, but still to this day, it was the most mind-blowing, incredible experience I've ever had on this planet. And it was, the medicine he got was super strong, and he used to encourage us to drink like a full glass of it. And it was so incredibly powerful. And combined with his music and his knowledge of the two things, ayahuasca and the music, it was just the most incredible experience of my life. And I was able to, in that session, really see my shadow up close and see the blocks in me that were still there. Even though I've been a therapist for 10 years and working a lot on myself, I realized there was still so much to do. And in that therapy session, which it was, it was like 50 therapy sessions in one night, things would come up from my past that I'd blocked out, even, real traumatic things that even with hypnotherapy, I hadn't been able to get to. They'd come up, and at that moment I'd vomit, I'd purge it out. And it was such a release, and it was so powerful. And I remember at the end of the night, or in the morning when we, sort of were coming round, I just felt completely wrecked, absolutely wrecked, because I'd cleared so much in that one evening and really faced some inner demons and inner turmoil. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. And I went back into my office in South London. I bought a warehouse back in the day, and I was shipping out CDs, and I had, a number of people working for me. And I was walking around the office like because you stay in the medicine for a good couple of weeks afterwards when you've had a big ceremony. And I remember just walking around feeling so disconnected from everyone, and them looking at me thinking, what's he been up to? What's he doing now? And it was an incredible, because I didn't really want to leave it. I loved that state so much. I didn't want to come back to the sort of 3D matrix. I was quite happy in that, other world. But yeah, I've journeyed many times since, but never quite as powerful as that one. That was something else.
So would you describe that altered state as a state of euphoria, or just your mind is completely at peace? What would you say?
It was at times, yeah, there were times when I was visiting, I remember visiting these crystal palaces, these beautiful, amazing, high dimensional places, and I honestly think they were real. I think ayahuasca enables you, you know, that DMT experience and you go so high with it, and I think you're able to see things that are out of your conscious awareness, and they're actually called a negative hallucinations. When you see something that is really there, it's called a negative hallucination. And you can see, and I was visiting these crystal palaces and angelic spirits all around me. And then an hour later, I'd be in the depths of hell and I'd be absolutely shitting myself because it was so dark and heavy. And I felt like I could step out of this world, you know, it was so, but I was facing, you know, the sort of shadow aspect of myself that was
Have you heard
coming up.
have you
Yeah.
heard of Bentov?
Bent off.
Yes.
No.
He's a scientist, and he actually there's a lot of things that he did, and I'll drop the link in the comments after the
Yeah,
video, but,
yeah,
he ascribed being able to see things in other dimensions as accessing higher states of consciousness. They're
mm,
there. We
yeah,
just can't see them because we're not tapped into that frequency.
yeah. I think that's what I saw. You know, I knew the difference between a positive and negative hallucination because I experienced a lot of LSD in my younger life where you'd have positive hallucinations, and that's where you're seeing things that are not really there. So when you experience acid, it, you know, activates your mind to a degree that you start hallucinating and you see things, you see the walls moving, you see things, animals coming out, and but they're positive hallucinations, they're not real. But in ayahuasca, you experience negative hallucinations. So you're able, exactly as you just said, to see things in higher realms that are really there in all realms, you know, higher and
Sort of
lower.
like the Matrix, we have all these things that we just can't see
Yeah,
from our perspective, and then
yeah,
you elevate, and then
yeah,
you're
yeah.
able to expand your
And
view and your perception of what really we exist in. I mean, the brain and consciousness just fascinates me so much.
yeah.
Um,
Well, we
and
talked about it. Yeah, we talked about it earlier, didn't we? That, you know, I think because we'd worked on ourselves, you know, we both had that traumatic upbringing, and then you find it's a healing solution. You do a lot of healing work on yourself, and then you want to help others. And, you know, so with that comes an elevated state of consciousness. You actually awaken and you start to see, you see your own shadow, you see your own truth, you see your own, yeah, the games you might play, different hats for different situations. And you start to become aware of that. So you kind of see your own BS and you
right,
become very good. You become very good at seeing it in others as well, which is
right.
a bit of a blessing and a curse at times.
Yes, for sure.
And all through, you know, as we talked about, all through COVID, I just, when it all started and you could see the media were lying through their teeth, you could see the governments were lying through their teeth about this virus, this deadly virus that was killing people in Japan or China or wherever it was. You saw it on the TV, people dropping dead. You think that's crap. That's just bullshit. They're just lying to us. And then you look around and you realize that 90% of people are falling for it.
Right,
And you think, what is going on? It's so obvious.
right,
You know, and I hate to sound, I don't want to sound elitist about it, or if it's not that, but it was the frustration of thinking, you know, I had some friends that I liked, cared about, that were just queuing up for the vaccines. And I'm saying, look, they're gonna cause you harm. The government are not they're not on your side. They're not a good force. They're gonna cause you harm if you do. You know, you're a tinfoil hat wearer. You know what you're talking about. And I could not believe that people couldn't see through it. That was the biggest shock to me of all. And I think what it came down to is that I'd been on this journey. I've been working on myself, healing, clearing a lot of my own stuff. And so you do have this clarity
right,
where you can see through illusions. I think that's what it is. It's any illusions you see through. And I think
right.
when you visited these higher and lower dimensions as well, you get this extra perception. You come back and you integrate into normal life, but you still got these perceptions, and you still know what's real and you know what's not. And there's everyone's on a journey, everyone's on a different level of that awakening, and there are people far more awake than me that have been come into this life with it, naturally. They've done it in their past lives, and but yeah, that was the big shock to me. It was such I never expected that when the whole COVID thing happened, that people would just be hypnotized, and that's what
Right.
it was. And the
Yeah.
government, the elites, I hate saying elites, they're not elites, but they were manipulating the masses, and they were using all the hypnotherapy techniques, mind control, fear programming, but it was so blatant. It was so blatant, and yeah, and thank God now more and more people are starting to wake up and see what's really going on, and you know, yeah, it's actually on the news now, so they're getting
Right.
it.
It's crazy. We've been programmed for years with all these things and fear programming.
Yeah,
And now all of a sudden people are waking up and seeing, because it's not just mainstream media now. Now the media, the new media is YouTube and TikTok and all these social media channels. Now we have independence.
yeah,
So they can no longer control the narrative. They can't
yeah,
continue to push fear-based programming because someone over here or over here is going to debunk it and say, "Hey, wait a minute. This doesn't sound right." Or, "Hey,
yeah,
look, this was manipulated. This
yeah.
doesn't look right."
Yeah, and thank God there were brave people who had big platforms that were willing to stand up. Julian Assange was the first one, wasn't he? He was the real whistleblower, probably the only authentic journalist in the world over the last 20 years. He was exposing, government corruption, and look what happened to him. Look what they did to him. They destroyed him.
I
And
mean, it's just amazing to me that over all these years that we've been programmed in such a way that we've just accepted this way of life, which is so completely disconnected from nature and what we are supposed to be
yeah,
doing and the way we're supposed to be living.
yeah,
And COVID was the epitome of it.
yeah,
Disconnect, just
yeah.
disconnect humanity from itself.
Yeah, and it was some of the brightest minds. I remember having debates and arguments on social media, which is always a no-no, but I couldn't help myself during COVID. But, with scientists and people who've been through higher levels of education, got all the degrees, all the knowledge, they got the funny hat and the gown and all that. And they would just, trust the science. This is, the government are telling us. And I was trying to say, well, what if the science is not trustworthy? Have you ever considered that? But because they've been through the whole school system and they've been rewarded in higher education and they got all the kudos for that, they were so, you know, locked into that matrix that they just couldn't see it. And, my two kids, my younger kids are both homeschooled. We haven't sent them to school because we don't believe in the school system. They're getting a great education outside that system, and they'll grow up completely free. They'll trust in their own sovereignty. They'll have their own belief systems, and they're thriving. They're both thriving. My kids are both musicians. They're into jujitsu. It's I couldn't be. It's the childhood that I always wanted. But they've got it, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I actually grew up in the Philippines, so I did have that childhood of freedom running around down to the beach, and
Oh
it
wow.
was very different. And you don't get that in the United States.
Mm.
If you let your kid walk up the street to the store, CPS is going to come take your kid away. That's basically what our country has come to. Uh,
Wow.
so it's a police state,
Yeah.
and something has to happen to stop the overreach of
Yeah.
you can't even raise your child free.
Yeah.
Uh, you can't do anything right as a
No.
parent. So
No.
you almost don't want to have kids in this day and age. And I,
Yeah.
I tell people not to have children in America, even though I have two sons,
Yeah.
because the state of the world has to change. We have to wake up. That
Yeah.
I hope the Epstein situation is going to turn a corner for a lot of people who've been asleep for so long and unconscious of just,
Yeah.
you know, stop watching all these movies that are fake. They're
Yeah.
programming you.
Yeah. And who are you watching? The people in
Right.
them are, if you knew what they were really about, you wouldn't go near them.
No, and if you start digging, which people don't because they have their TV on all day, every
Yeah.
day, and when do you have time to research?
Yeah.
But thankfully now, the next generation are researchers. They are questioning everything. They
Yeah.
are way more aware than we were.
Yeah. Because they're on their devices, they're not sitting in front of the mainstream TV, and
Right.
yeah, there's a lot more discernment coming through. And so, yeah, that's the hope, isn't it? That, more and more people will wake up and, um, it's that's the frustrating thing, it's not so much that, we've got this tyranny from the governments and the fake media. I had a there's a guy that follows me, he's been listening to my recordings for a long time, and when he saw my post during COVID, he said, "I'm so glad you're awake." He said, I'd have been devastated if you'd been, gone the other way." And, and he said that he grew up in a fascist country in Europe, and he said, and it was very oppressive, and in some ways it was harder. He said, but in other ways it wasn't, because he said all the people were united against the government. It was the people against the government, and they knew that, they knew who the, where the corruption was. He said, but he said an interesting thing. He said, but now, he said, the government, or the people who are running the governments, have done it in such a way that they've got people pitted against each other. Left v right, the gender
Right.
debates, Black Lives Matter, all of that, you know, religion. People are, fighting over all of these things and arguing and getting really heated about it. And it's the old tactic, divide and rule.
Right, and
And
and they found that that's actually all funded. It was all funded, these signs were purchased, uh,
yeah,
and these people were in signal groups being told where to go, where to show up,
yeah,
what to do,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we're hopping on these bandwagons, getting all up in arms in
yeah,
division when we should be uniting together against our common enemy.
exactly that. That's it in a nutshell, isn't it? And, but they're, clever. And that was their tactic, to get everyone fighting and arguing. And then they're, getting away with absolute murder. And so much of that was traced back to George Soros, wasn't it?
Mhm,
It
yep.
still is. He's the financier of, a lot of the crazy left wing, politics. And, you just follow the money, don't you? You follow the money supply up to him, Bill Gates, all these tyrants who are just the front. They're the front for the deep state, aren't they? These people, we see them. There's lots more behind the scenes, but they're the ones who are at the front are at last getting exposed, and they've been, yeah, they're making it into the mainstream media now, which is kind of good to see. But yeah, you just continue to hope it will continue to change, and there's this mass awakening, and then the veil will continue to be lifted, and everyone will see what's going on,
Right.
because it has been a frustrating ride, hasn't it, the last few years?
Yes, it has. But my ride has led me to develop the George method, which integrates self hypnosis
Mhm.
and integrates the Ultimate Hypnosis app to help awaken and expand consciousness so that we stop being manipulated so easily. Because
Yeah,
if you're reprogramming yourself every night and every day, you're less likely to fall for the BS.
yeah. That's the really good point. When you're doing this work, the inner work, and you're using meditation or self hypnosis you've got a daily practice. The one thing that we can do to break out of this corruption and the
Matrix.
darkness in the world, the matrix, is to, build your own little sovereign bubble. And, we've done that. We've homeschooled our kids. We live in Portugal. There's a really conscious community out here on the Algarve. um, you step further and further out of it as much as you can, and you become more and more sovereign, in control of your own life. And one of the best ways to do that is, as you said there, to build a hypnosis practice, a daily meditation or hypnosis practice, either or, they're both very similar, that take you down into a state where you're out of the monkey mind, you're not thinking, you're not worrying, you're dropping down into your conscious thoughts, into your unconscious mind, and you're empowering yourself with positivity. And yeah, it's amazingly powerful. I've got if you need help with that, I've got a really good morning meditation. So I've got 2 morning meditation tracks in my app, Ultimate Hypnosis, and you can listen to them for 15 minutes in the morning, and it sets your day up because they're full of positive thoughts and suggestions, affirmations, and it sets you up for the day. And that's it. Start your day as you mean to go on. I mean, I've got into a routine now where I do that. I have a hydration drink in the morning, squeeze lemon, silica, green powders, all of that. The first thing I do a little 20-minute yoga session every day. And you kind of habit stack. I didn't start that, but I've kind of built that into my routines, and I've been doing that for about a couple of years now. I'm really feeling the benefits of it. Because as I get older, I'm 64 this year, and I don't want to, look at a lot of people my age, and they're slowly down the doctors more, and they're taking pills and all that. I think, again, it's another trap. You get caught in that cycle. And so I'm actively going the other way, and I'm being completely sovereign in my health. And I'm not going to take
Right.
it. I'll
I
never
love
take it.
that. I love that
Yeah,
because
yeah.
a dysregulated system can't heal
Mm,
because you're in fight or flight. So you're
mm,
either healing
mm.
or all your body's resources are going to digestion and surviving whatever it is in your environment. So nervous
Yeah.
system regulation is the number one thing everyone needs to learn as a daily skill.
Mm,
And the self programming, self hypnosis helps to regulate the nervous system, and repeated over time, you're rewiring your brain patterns.
mm.
So I love that aspect of it where peace becomes your baseline.
Yeah, it does. And you navigate so much better from that place. Even if conflict comes along, you
Right.
navigate those things much better. You're not, like you mentioned earlier, you're not reactive to certain things or triggers, and it's just an easier journey. You still have ups and downs in life, you have challenges, um, but you're never the victim. When you're conscious, you're never a victim. We exactly this time last year, we were burgled, and it was really, quite a thing that came out of the blue. It was quite traumatic. We lost a lot. There's a lot that was stolen, and it was a real professional hit. I'd been targeted. I've been profiled and then targeted, and they wiped the cameras. I had 2 alarm systems, cameras, and they wiped the lot. And it was really unnerving knowing that they'd been profiling me and tracking me and all that kind of thing. And then the kids didn't feel settled in the house. So that was, an example. Something comes along, hits you out the blue, you don't expect, a real curveball. And I thought, you're in the emotion of it for initially, because you have to process that, you have to go through that. And then after it, once things had settled down a bit, I thought, well, look, it's a big hit, it's a blow, but things happen in life. You don't know why, but they happen. And I didn't want that to define 2025. So I'd half written a book. I'd been to a shamanic retreat 10 years before. I'd half written a book and then left it. And I thought, I'm going to finish that book because the book is going to define my year, not the burglary. And so I got my head down and I kind of rewrote it, even though I'd written half of it. I'd been 10 years further on the healing journey. So I'd rewritten half of it. And I got the book finished in about 6 months, got it all done and dusted. And I've just released it. And I'm more proud of this, my 8th book, and I'm more proud of this one than any other one, because this is what I'm going to remember from 2025. And yeah, that's kind of, an example of how you turn a negative into a positive. You have to process these things as they come along, but then think about how you can change the state, and you don't have to stay stuck in that, whatever the trauma was, whatever happened. And so, yeah, if I can give it a little plug.
Yeah. What's the name of your book?
There it is. I don't know.
Awaken and Ascend.
Yeah. on Amazon and getting lovely reviews for it already. And yeah, I'm really proud of this one. It's because I've talked about a lot about my life in this one. The books I wrote before, I got signed in 2006. I got this dream book deal with Orion, the biggest publisher in Europe, and with McGraw-Hill in the States. It was a massive book deal, 6 figures and 5 books. And yeah, there's a story to how I manifested it. Maybe I'll tell you that in another webinar, but got this big book deal. And it was a dream because I got this massive advance. I felt like an imposter. I had that imposter syndrome. I'd sit around this massive boardroom in this big office in London and they'd be talking about the Glen Harrell brand. I'm thinking, are they for real? You know, do they know who I am? I really had that imposter feeling. But I played the game and I, did all the interviews and all that. And it was a really good experience. I look back on it fondly. But the one thing was they had a clear idea of what they wanted. They wanted, because there was a guy in the UK called Paul McKenna who just sold 1 million books. He was a hypnotist.
Yep.
He'd sold 1 million books. And so they realized there was a big gap in the market and they wanted the next Paul McKenna, which I wasn't. And so they tried to mold me in that direction. And the first book I wrote, I had a lot of, what I'd learned, a lot of spiritual knowledge that I'd learned, I put into the book. And they were saying, no, that's too woo-woo. That's too, people won't get that. You're too out there. And I said, look, this is what I put in my recordings, my hypnosis recordings, which are selling really well. It's the key ingredient that makes them work. That sort of deeper knowledge. No, that's too. And so they'd edit anything too spiritual. They'd edit it out. So the books were pretty sanitized, and they were on relaxation, sleep, weight loss, all the big subjects. And I couldn't write what I wanted to. So for the first time with this book, I'm self-published with this one. I didn't even look at a major publisher. Self-published, and I'm more than happy because I stand and fall by what's in it. And I do. I cover the matrix in it. I cover
Awesome.
all subjects that I wouldn't be able to write about if I was with a big publisher. So yeah,
Congratulations on that. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. It's funny, the last book I did write for them, they kind of, by then, the other books hadn't sold as well as they'd hoped. So they gave me a bit of a free rein on the last one. And that was called The Answer. It was kind of based on the law of attraction and how hypnotherapy can supercharge the law of attraction.
I can definitely attest to that. When I went from being a stay-at-home mom to making 6 figures a year, when I was nightly listening to your self-hypnosis tracks.
Oh, brilliant.
So it really put me on the straight and narrow of staying aligned with my goals, which was to send my sons to Montessori school. And that was my whole goal. And it ended up everything just started falling in my lap.
Yeah.
And it was because I was in this elevated state most of the time and ignoring the things that were going on around me. Because at the time I was in an abusive marriage and I was able to disconnect from the trauma state and stay in a mostly regulated state to be a very high performing individual at home on my phone. So it made me a believer in the power of self-programming and elevating your frequency to staying coherent, and how magnetic you become when you do end up regularly, say, showering your consciousness, right? Like we shower our bodies every day. Why don't we clear our brains every day, right? Same thing. We pick up all these emotions and frequencies and smog, energetic and emotional smog from other people and things and situations. We should be clearing those things as much as we do our physical bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you be projecting out your goals, like meditating every day and that kind of thing?
Yep.
Yeah.
I would actually visualize exactly what I wanted and feel it And it did
Yeah.
so rapidly. Everything just happened.
Yeah.
And when I stopped feeling it, it stopped attracting as much. So you almost
Yeah.
have to continually put fuel in the tank, so to speak.
You do. You do.
Every day, reprogram. It is so important to reprogram every single
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. That's it. And life can sometimes take you away from it, can't it? You can get distracted from
Yep.
that,
Uh-huh.
because it doesn't always feel like a priority, meditating, or you've got to go and pay your tax bill or whatever. You know,
But
you
it's so important,
It's
you
so
know,
important. It really is. It can transform your life,
it
you
truly.
know? I was that, street kid, little delinquent tearaway that, was most likely to fail at my school, that ended up, writing 8 books and selling millions of hypnosis recordings. And, it's funny, some of my old friends, have come out, and got in touch with me that I haven't seen for 30, 40 years. And I had one friend who got in touch about 5 years ago, and we lived in a squat in London when I was about 16, 17, and got up to all kinds of mischief. And he said, "Oh, I can't believe it. You've written all these books. You're a hypnotherapist." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I kind of turned my life around late 20s and went on this path, and I've never looked back." And I said, "What have you been up to?" He said, "I've just come out from 25 years inside."
Oh.
And he'd he'd ended up as on the top 10 wanted list in the UK because he was robbing banks in the 90s. And he had an addiction. He was feeding his addiction. He was robbing banks to pay for his addiction. And, bless his heart, he ended up going down the wrong track. Even him, he wasn't a bad person because I knew him as a kid, and, you get to know each other when you live together. And he was just he came from a real, I mean, I came from a troubled background, but he came from a really troubled background. And he knew no other way than crime. But he
Right?
wasn't really a bad person. Even in prison, he told me that he learnt to paint, and he had quite a talent for it. And he got into Scientology in prison and done a lot of healing work himself, came out, and because he was a lifer, he had all these, he was in galleries in London.
Hmm.
And I was living in Portugal. I was out in Portugal, so I never got to see him. And sadly, he passed away a couple of years ago. But if I'd lived in the UK, I would have gone to some of his galleries and hooked up with him. But it was kind of brought home to me how much my life had changed, because sometimes you get on a path and your whole circle changes, the people you mix with. And it just reminded me of, that journey. It was like my wife sometimes says, you've had 2 different lifetimes completely. But
Yeah.
yeah, it just the inner work you said there, that's so, so powerful when you do that, when you build a daily practice where you're empowering yourself and you're drilling in these affirmations into your unconscious that you're abundant, you're happy, your relationships, you have wonderful relationships, and visualizing them with every cell in your body, you're feeling it. When I first learned hypnotherapy, when I very first learned it, late 20s, I realized how powerful it was. That classroom story I told you about, I managed to get over that. I thought, wow, this is powerful. I can do anything with this. So for every day, I would lay on my bed and I'd visualize living in a £1 million house, owning an Aston Martin car, having a villa in Florida. Because I was a young man, I wanted the material things back then, and I used to do that. And my wife at the time, Ali, she said to me, she said that the bed would vibrate. She'd be fit. I was so deep entranced and I was so resonating with these affirmations. She said the bed would be vibrating, and I wasn't aware of that, but she'd tell me afterwards. And then I read somewhere, some studies said that if you do affirmations when you're in water, they're even more powerful.
Mhm.
So I would lay in the bath every time I
Yep.
was, back then I had baths, and I'd lay in the bath
Ah.
and I'd just have my nose out the water and I'd be projecting these affirmations out, seeing the house, the car and all that. And it became part of my whole day. I was so enamored with this skill set that I developed that I thought so I wouldn't listen to the radio in the car if I used to do deliveries back then, and I'd be driving on a job and I'd be listening to mantras and chants and affirmations, and my whole day was filled up with that. And at the time I was living in a tower block in a really rough area in South London. I had an old banger of a car. And in spite of that, my real circumstances, I was visualizing this stuff. And it was about 10 years later, I drove up to Birmingham in the UK to buy an Aston Martin for cash.
Mhm.
And it was a moment. It was a real moment, because everything I'd visualized 10 years before had happened. I did end up with that house, the villa in Florida, and the car. And it
Well,
was like,
people don't understand how, they think this is woo-woo, but it's neuroscience. If you train your brain to
mm,
focus on a end goal and a specific outcome, and you write it
yeah,
down or you affirm it every day, your brain will take the necessary steps to get you to that end goal. It's going to open up all these pathways
yeah,
to where you will get to that end goal. And
yeah,
unfortunately, most people negatively uh, attract things because
mm,
they're always focusing on the negatives in their lives and reaffirming the negative things in their lives
mm,
instead of reaffirming the goal and the end point of what they actually want in their life.
yeah. And that's a really good point. It's been proven scientifically that when we hold certain thoughts and we project those thoughts, we can affect external matter. So atoms and molecules respond to our thought processes. And Dr. Emoto did that study, didn't he, with the
Yep, the
crystalline
water.
structure of water. And when you played the water positive speeches and sent it love, the crystalline structure of it was really beautiful when it was iced. And when they played it, negative hate speeches, it was an ugly structure. And that proved that the thoughts we hold affect external matter, affect our external world. And so when I was in that, immersed in that daily meditation ritual for hour, literally an hour a day, and I was doing all those affirmations, chanting, I was reading books by people like Stuart Wilde and Eckhart Tolle later on, Louise Hay back in the day, and going to groups, going to workshops, any self-help speaker that was, I'd go and listen to them, anyone that was knowledgeable. I just had this thirst for knowledge. And yeah, within 10 years, my life changed to that point so dramatically. The external world, opportunities came along. Like, it was
Mhm.
just unbelievable, really. Getting that book deal, when I was a nobody, I'd sold quite a few cassettes and CDs back then, but I wasn't, I wasn't known other than that. But I suddenly had this major publishing company offer me a 6-figure book deal, and being one of their main authors.
Hmm.
I remember I got invited to their conference as one of the 3 authors. They chose 3 authors, and one was a famous singer in the UK called Jamelia back then. There was Julie Walters, who was in she was
Sound of
in
Music.
Mamma Mia. Yeah, she's been in a lot of big things, a lot of big films. She's a huge star in England. And I'd been a cab driver about 10 years before. And suddenly there I was on stage, sharing a stage with her. And yeah, that was another moment, in front of like 1,200 people, being lauded as this new author. But it was weird, I wish I'd told the story of being Julie's cab driver, because it would have made a really good story.
Huh.
But I was so new to it all. I was new to this big stage, and I just kept to the script sort of thing, because I didn't want to rock the boat or anything or say anything out of it. But it would have been a great story when I look back on it. But yeah, it's incredible how much life changed. So when you do this work, when you do the inner work, when you work on healing and clearing your shadow, clearing trauma, clearing sabotage patterns, and you really explore your unconscious, and you revisit your childhood if you have to, it's amazing what you can achieve. Because even when I started to become successful, I still found that I was sabotaging things. Opportunities were coming along, and I was unconsciously, things were happening that were blowing them out the water. And it happened a few times, and I thought, this is a pattern. This is not just bad luck. There's something in me that I need to change, even
Mhm.
though it didn't feel like it was my fault. And so I went and I did some inner work, went back, where's this coming from? What's the energy behind it? And in a trance state, I went back to being 5 years of age. And I remember my mum and dad having a blazing row and literally nose to nose screaming at each other. My dad ripping up money, throwing it at my mum. And there's me as a little nipper looking up, thinking money causes a lot of stress and arguments, you know. And I had this video playing in my unconscious that I'd forgotten about. But it was only during the self-hypnosis that I could revisit it and I could clear it and I could, speak to that 5-year-old and from an adult perspective and explain, you don't, money doesn't cause problems. You can let go of this. You can release it. And I processed it. And then I found all the sabotage patterns started to disappear and opportunities weren't getting blown. So it's quite amazing. It's like the analogy is you take out an old program out of a computer and you put in a new one. And
Right.
that's very much the way the mind works.
I mean, imagine if we taught this in elementary school, right? Imagine
Oh,
if we taught this to children. We would
yeah,
have world peace in no
we would.
time.
We would in one generation.
In one, if you have everyone a regulated nervous system, no one would be viewing the world as victimizing them. They would be
Yeah,
seeing behind the patterns as, oh, this person is dysregulated. Let me
yeah,
help mirror regulation, right?
yeah.
It,
They'd be
it's
so
it,
empowered. You'd grow up empowered and
right,
believing in yourself.
right.
I always remember I told you that when I first became a hypnotherapist, my oldest son, Lee, was about 6. So I was, using it a lot with him and I was teaching him, how to, plant these little positive thoughts in your mind. And I always remember one day he was playing in a football team and he got dropped. So he wasn't in the team. And I looked up and he marched straight over to the manager and he said, "Why have you dropped me? I'm one of the best players in the team." And he was about 7 or 8 and he's remonstrating with this manager and the guy standing there with his mouth open thinking, who is this kid? He's got some self-belief, hasn't he? So I thought, hang on, I've got to maybe I need to balance this out a little bit. But, he grew up with a lot of self-belief and a lot of confidence. And, I'm so delighted that he never
So
went through.
important,
Yeah,
because narcissistic personality disorder and all these personality disorders come from a deep-seated, uh, you know,
wound.
wound and insecurity. The
Yeah,
deeper the insecurity, the deeper the narcissism
yeah,
of coercive control and all these abuse dynamics. We could stop that in a single generation if we
yeah.
helped restore people's confidence in themselves.
And also to teach people that, why they react in certain ways.
Right.
If people understood that, then, it's so liberating because you can then do the inner work and you can heal those wounds and traumas. And then
Asking
you're not,
why. Why did
yeah,
I just react that way? Why did I just get triggered by that? Right. That
yeah,
was one of my deepest methods of, actually healing my triggers is why
yeah,
did that trigger me? What does this stem from,
yeah,
in my childhood? And imagine if we taught that to children.
yeah. It would be so powerful, incredibly powerful. I mean, you teach it to your kids, I teach my
Right.
kids. And, we do live in this age of awakening. So more and more people are doing this. You meet people of a like mind who are on this path. And it's an amazing time to be alive. And I think, yeah, with children, it's the most important job. It's such because you think, your children grow up with this awareness and with a whole new way of living. And then it's that your whole lineage benefits from that. It goes
So,
down. Not the abuse cycles that we grew up in.
so do you have child specific audio files yet?
I've made, yeah, I did years and years ago. I made a children's confidence title, and since then I've got a number of, yeah, kids titles for that are little stories with
Mhm.
metaphors woven into them. The magic spaceship and
Right.
a day at the beach. and they've got little metaphors. So yeah, I've got titles for kids as well.
So people can use that. Download the Ultimate Hypnosis app. There's several
Yeah.
several apps you have now.
Yeah, Ultimate Hypnosis is the main one. It's got all of my recordings in. I host webinars here on StreamYard every fortnight for the members, and it's got a really amazing little community in the app, to the point where a number of the members got together and decided to come and visit me out here in Lagos. Yeah, which was quite
Awesome.
amazing. We had people from all over, from the US, from the UK, Canada, and there was even a lady, 81-year-old Margaret, came over from Melbourne in Australia, flew all the way on her own. Bless her heart. It was yeah, so sweet to see them all, and they're coming again this year. It's going to be a regular thing now.
Oh.
So yeah, amazing community in the app.
Well, I can say it's definitely transformed my life. I've been using it since 2017. Anytime I get to a specific state where I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to calm down and regulate, I hit play.
Oh, fantastic.
And
I'm
it
pleased to
works
hear that.
every time. Sometimes I have to play too, but it
Yeah,
works.
that's wonderful. And I think, it's that thing, isn't it, that you kind of you're attracted to other therapists or, authors or whatever that are on, there's a similar alignment. I always found that. It's funny, isn't it? Looking at the Epstein files, Deepak Chopra. Man, I was surprised at that, but I'd never vibed with his stuff.
No.
He was the biggest self-help guru in the world at one point. He was massive. And every time I looked at his stuff, I didn't really dislike it, but it just didn't vibe with me. There was something, so I just never listened to him,
No
never watched him.
resonance.
No resonance. Now I know why. It's so, and that's your intuition. That's that
Right.
guidance, inner guidance, isn't it? And yeah, I've always liked Eckhart Tolle. I've always vibed with his stuff. And I actually met him because we had the same app developer. So I met him in Malibu through my app developer. And yeah, thank God he's not in the files, because I think if I'd seen him in the files, I think I'd have given up.
Yeah,
But
that's
you never know.
funny.
They're still releasing them, aren't they? There's still a lot more to come. So who
Oh,
knows? Who knows what the
yeah,
next stamp's going to
right.
reveal?
Well, the good thing is people are waking up, and
Yeah,
it's also great that we have these tools that we can use. So
yeah, 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 yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on today and
It's been
discuss.
lovely. Really great speaking to you.
And yeah, we're gonna send this out, and thank you.
You're welcome.